Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's free public webinar with TPC Training entitled 2021 NFPA 70E Changes. We're going to be highlighting the changes of the new 2021 NFPA 70E code today in our standard for electrical safety in the workplace for 2021. We are joined today by Bob Kluke. He is our esteemed TPC training instructor who is an expert on electrical safety and a master electrician in many states here in the United States. We look forward to learning more from Bob about this topic and some of these latest updates to the standard. For everyone here who's coming into the session, we wanted to let you know that this session is live today. So that means feel free to interact with us throughout this session. You won't be able to talk to us, with your audio, but you can type some of your questions you have for Bob or for myself during this session. And so to do so, you can go ahead and see your toolbar along the bottom of your screen, and you're going to see a button called Q&A. And so when you click that Q&A button, you can go ahead and type your answer, and that's going to come to us here on the panel, and we'll be able to answer those questions by the end of the session. So we'll be speaking for about 35-40 minutes, and so that last 20 minutes of time we'll really be able to dedicate time to answering as many of your questions as possible. Also wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and because of that, you'll be able to share this recording of this session with your colleagues, your coworkers, your supervisor, and so on and so forth. And that'll be available on our website about 2 business days after the completion of this session. And then finally, the slides you're going to be seeing here, you don't have to worry about taking a screenshot as we go, because we're going to be having a PDF available for you to download of these slides after this session is over. And then you're going to see the chat line here, and be careful about using that chat line. We're not really going to be monitoring that. Instead, use the Q&A line to get any information over to us. So thank you so much. And then what we're going to do next is start us off with a little poll. We'd like to know who's here on the line. And we would like to just understand a little bit about who's here, knowing a little bit more about some of your experience you're bringing here, and that'll really help Bob as we talk to you all about this topic. So looks like people are just making sure their audio is going on, and I think we're clear on the audio. So if it does persist, definitely use the Q&A line to share your experience. Thank you all so much for your input. Now here's what we're going to do. You're going to see a poll, a series of 3 questions showing up on your screen right now. So you should see a little window popping up with some questions we'd like to ask you, and choose the answer that applies to you the most. Question number 1 is, when was the last time you received training on the NFPA 70E standard? Was it less than 1 year ago? Was it between 1 and 3 years ago? Was it over 3 years ago? Or have you not, in your recent memory, received training for NFPA 70E before? Our next question for you is, are you considered qualified to work on live electrical circuits at your organization? Is that answer yes? Is that answer absolutely no? Or are you not sure whether you're qualified or not? And there's a very specific definition we're going to talk about today. And then third is, who performs electrical work at your facility? Is it employees or is it contractors? Or if you find that it's both, you can click both. And we'll give you a chance to continue making some of your answers here. We got the answers rolling in. And once we get all your answers in, I will share those results with you here. All right, answers are coming in. You all are doing really good. And I think they're starting to even out here from a total answers perspective. So I will go ahead and end the poll now. We got some great answers coming in. And I'm going to share the results with you. So a window should be showing up with some bars coming across the screen to show what the percentage of answers were that we received. So you see that most of you, the most popular answer here is between 1 and 3 years ago, you received your latest electrical safety training to the NFPA 70E standard. That is great. So that means you're pretty much up to date so far on your training. But as soon as that 3-year mark goes by, I think it'll be time for you to get your training on this latest standard for 2021. And you'll get some of the highlight of what those are today. Great. Also, 22% of you have taken it within 1 year. So you guys are really keeping up to date. For those 18% of you, or the 17 on top of that, so what is that? Around 35% of you who have taken your training over 3 years ago or have not received your training before, this will be a really good motivation for you to maybe look toward getting that full 2-day training on NFPA 70E, either virtually with one of our instructors or in a classroom location. Number two, are you considered qualified to work on live electrical circuits at your organization? Yes, so we have a lot of qualified electrical workers here on the session today, 56% of you, while 43% of you say no, absolutely not. And that's going to be really good to know, that you can identify whether or not you are qualified to do a certain job. Number three being, who performs the electrical work at your facility? Your employees of your own organization. 85% of you say that employees do electrical work, while 79% of you say contractors do your electrical work. So it is a toss-up. Is it employees or is it contractors? And how will we be able to safely make sure one or the other can do work in our facility? That's what NFPA 70E is going to cover in some detail as well. So thank you very much. That lets us know kind of who's here, and it helps inform us as we get ready to chat with you about the latest standard. So go ahead and feel free to press the X button on the poll itself, that little white window that showed up for the poll results, and it'll close, and you should be able to see our presentation behind it, and be able to see all the updates here. So from here, I'm going to give it over to Bob, our resident expert here. Thank you so much for being here, Bob.
Thank you, Ryan. Excellent with your poll questions. Gives me a great idea who we have on our call. So that is perfect. A little bit about TPC. We are in the training business, of course. So we do online training, instructor-led training. And since COVID has come around, most of our training has been virtual, and we've had to adapt relatively quickly, but we certainly have made it work. And I can tell you that our training now is very interactive online, and I just finished one this week, and really I believe that the students had a great feel for what is inside of NFPA 70E. So my name coming up, of course, and Ryan talked about all this. And just want to reiterate a little bit that if you do have any questions, Ryan and I are going to address those at the end, and it's much better to give that question in the Q&A box rather than in the chat box. So that would be a great thing. So let's get right into 70E a little bit. First thing I'd like to mention is this, that when these national consensus standards become available to us and the NFPA has distributed them, they become immediately effective. So this document was issued in August of 2020. It superseded all previous editions. And so we've been under this now for a while. And there's a process putting it together, of course. We can put public inputs in. We used to call those proposals, but those all come from the public. 332 people put those in, and the technical committee discussed them all, and 86 of those actually went to what we call the second draft, which is pretty much the final document, right? But we did have some time to make some public comments, and they revised a little bit. Now, if you ever want to see the second revision or the public comments, it's right on NFPA's website. You can check that out at any time. So we're going to start with definitions. That's where the first changes did occur for us. And in 2018, you can see it had a definition of balaclava, and then in parentheses, sock hood. Well, in 2021, they revised that definition just a little bit, and they took out the words sock hood, because a balaclava is not a sock, and it's really not a hood. It's a head protective piece of fabric that does protect our neck and head, except for a small portion of the facial area. But basically, they wanted to clarify that one up just a little tiny bit for us. And then they changed barrier up. We can see at the end of this definition, it says, or to prevent unauthorized access to a work area. And so that's exactly what they deleted, is that part right there. And the reason that they deleted that, let's take a look at the statement that the committee released, is that in other sections, other than just Article 100, where definitions is located, the term barrier was used just a little bit differently. And so up in 130.7D1, it was used a little differently. They wanted to make sure that the definition did correlate with what was going on up in Article 130. So they did change it up just some, but they're really stressing that this new definition does not prohibit the construction of a barricade to basically keep people out of our workspace. So we can still do that. The new definition definitely will take care of that also. But it is a physical obstruction. It can be cones, it can be red tape, it can be something even more sturdy than that. But they wanted to clarify that one point for us. Electrically safe work condition. And so in 2018, here we can see that definition. And so in 2021, it really didn't change. So why do I have it in the PowerPoint, right? Well, it's in the PowerPoint because they gave us an informational note and they wanted us to make sure that we understand that this is the definition. This is not the procedure. This is a state, and it's a state which everything has been disconnected. It's been locked and tagged out with established standards, pretty much NFPA 70E. Then it's been tested to verify the absence of voltage. And so all this is the definition. It's not the procedure we would use or the steps. We would find those steps up in Article 120. So here they wanted to just clarify that a little bit. Now we see the definition of switchgear, arc resistant switchgear, really. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted you to know that in 2021, there's more equipment out there that can be arc resistant other than just switchgear. So they said equipment at the beginning of this. And so now we could have arc resistant motor control centers, arc resistant distribution centers, anything that the manufacturer can come up with, we could definitely have. And they gave us an informational note to go along with this. And so IEEE, of course, has some great standards to go along with ANSI and ASTM and the NFPA also. And so in this one, they have told us that the IEEE does have a standard for the guide for testing switchgear for the internal arcing faults. And then another informational note that is referring us to Annex O for some information on arc resistant equipment. So giving us a little bit of information to go up there, and Annex O is design characteristics for us, how we can design the equipment so that it could be arc resistant. Shock hazard also came into play as being a little bit of a change here. They put in the word exposed because the technical committee believes this, that if the equipment has all the covers on and there's no openings and we cannot reach into where those energized parts are, then there is no shock hazard. So they really wanted to stress that to us. And so they did put the word exposed in. And we should all remember this, that if the electrical equipment has been maintained properly, if it was installed properly, all the covers are on, no evidence of impending failure, then there are no hazards. We should be able to walk past that equipment in the course of a day and not be exposed to a hazard. Then they came up with something new for the definition of nominal voltage. The voltages you can see in 2018, those are pretty much all AC systems. So our single phase system, our three phase systems, but then they put in an informational note for some DC systems. So there's some battery systems out there that do have a nominal voltage of 48 volts DC, but when they are charging, that can float all the way up to 58 volts. So in a DC application, they decided to use 60 volts to cover the entire range of those battery systems. And they just wanted to make sure that we understood why they did that. Now we get into the heart of the document a little bit, which is Article 110. Article 110, just like all of the NFPA documents, is a general article. So we have, doesn't matter if we went into the National Electrical Code, we would have Article 110 there, which is a general article, which you need. We need that article. And so they made this one a little bit more general. You can see in 2018, it started right off with something that was not that general, which was the electrical safety program. And now you can see that they have shifted that up to 110.5. And then we can look down, and sure enough, they moved all this kind of specific requirement up into a little bit farther behind in Article 110. Well, what's going to take their place? First of all, the technical committee believes this. They want to stress this just as much as possible, is that when we are doing risk assessments, that hazard elimination has to be our first priority. So they want us establishing an electrically safe work condition and eliminating that hazard if it's at all possible. And so that was moved to the front of 110 so that we understand the importance of that. And they put the informational note in here, just telling us and reiterating the fact that this is a state, right? And it's just a state that the equipment is in. It happens to be a state where there is no energy. We have established that electrically safe work condition. It's a de-energized state. And if we wanted to see how to accomplish that, we would go all the way up to Article 120. Also, they're referring us to Annex F. If, in fact, we need a little bit of help doing risk assessments, then Annex F gives us a great examples on how to complete risk assessments. Also, we see that the committee statement here, basically what I just said, they wanted to make sure that they clarified the fact that they took out the term zero energy, because they didn't have any definition for that. And they replaced it with the term de-energized. And so that is very important. And remember, it's just a state. It's not something that is a procedure. What else replaced it? 110.2. And so here, kind of more of housekeeping change. The third sentence was deleted because it was identical to the very first sentence. And so we have to understand that conductors and circuit parts are not going to be considered to be an electrically safe work condition until we get up into Article 120 and satisfy all those requirements. So that went into 110.2. 110.3. And so this was a little bit of a semantic type of a change, because what they're telling us here is about putting this equipment into an electrically safe work condition. Well, one, there's a couple conditions that have to exist. If we go inside the limited approach boundary, for anything other than troubleshooting, they really want that to be in an energized electrical work condition. I mean, electrically safe work condition, excuse me. Or if we're going to interact with that equipment in such a way that could increase the chances of having an exposure to an arc flash hazard. In other words, maybe racking a breaker in, maybe stabbing onto a bus duct. Those things do increase the chances of an arc flash, right? And so they're telling us here that there was an issue about, working on it. And a lot of people believed that that would have to be something that the person was being paid, or maybe if somebody was just standing by observing what one of us was doing, that's not work. So they wouldn't have to establish this electrically safe work condition. But that's not the case. They believe that if we are inside that boundary, really for any reason whatsoever, then they want us to establish that electrically safe work condition. Okay. So a little bit of change here about the electrical safety program. They have shortened this up just a little bit. They took the last sentence out, and I'm going to tell you why they happened to take that last sentence out. They took that out because they are now going to reference everything to an NXP. So anything that has to do with um, occupational health and safety management system, they're going to get that out of the text of the document itself, and they're just going to reference us up to NXP, which gives us all kinds of information about aligning this safety standard with other occupational health and safety standards. And so any reference, not just here in Article 110, but throughout the whole document, now you're just going to see an informational note to give us an idea. Let's get up to NXP to make sure we know how to align this with other standards. On 110.5 H2, which deals with risk assessments, by the way, and step 2 of the risk assessment. So the first step of a risk assessment would be identifying the hazard. And now we're into making a judgment on how likely it would be that we might get injured. And they are telling us now that we have to take into consideration the electrical equipment relative to the hazards. We have to take into consideration the person doing the work. And so they're referring us again to another annex, Annex Q. And we should know, just common sense, that if a person with 6 months experience is doing the work compared to a person with 30 years experience, it's going to be a different percentage that we would put on this risk assessment as far as the opportunity for somebody to become injured. And so another reference to the annexes. Here we can see that 110.5 is our electrically safe work condition policy, and they're telling us that our electrical safety program has to include this policy. So we have to have the procedures on how to establish this in our electrically safe work condition policy, which should be in our electrical safety program. All employers are required to have an electrically safe program. When I'm teaching students, I always let them know about the electrical safety program and what should be in it. And one of the most important items is that procedure to establish this condition. Also, they changed this one up a little bit, and I'm really a big fan of this change. It used to say in 2018, it just said retraining was the only words it said at the very beginning of this section. Now it says additional training, which is so much better because one is if new technology showed up, well, that's not retraining, that's additional training. And so that's excellent. We do know that we do have to be trained in NFPA 70E, not to exceed every 3 years. And so, we have to have some type of training to make sure we accomplish that. And we have to make sure that that's documented. In fact, all of the training and all of the audits that are inside of NFPA 70E have to be documented. So here, just a little change on that. But I do would like to have you look at number 1 a little bit, because it says if I'm doing an audit and the employee is not complying with the PPE requirements or any other work practices, of course, this is saying retrain. And I'm saying to myself, how many times am I going to have to retrain them if they're not going to comply? Well, they did give us an a statement. So this statement came from the second revision, which I'm glad they clarified this up. If it's just that a worker decides they're not going to comply, then that's not what this is all about. There's other ways to accomplish. If they decide they're not going to comply with the standard just because of they don't want to, well, there's other ways we can do that. We don't have to retrain in that case. We can do many other things, but they understand the training. I mean, that's no problem. They're just choosing not to follow the training. This is, they must have had some insight, because remember, I told you at the beginning that this document actually was distributed in 2020, way before COVID ever came around. And so this was always a pet peeve of mine, that the training had to be classroom, had to be on the job, or a combination of the two. And I always considered classroom face-to-face instruction, right? Well, they cleared that up for me with this informational note. Classroom training can now include interactive, electronic, or interactive web-based training components. So, and I knew this way back in August of last year, right? Of 2020. And so I said to myself, I said, how good is this? Because quickly, TPC Training had to adapt to this, web-based virtual training, and this came right with us. We could bring it in. The students could still get their required CEUs from the training, and the training became extremely interactive because very quickly we came up with some simulations for them to do things like live dead live, or read an arc flash warning label, or choose the right personal protective equipment they need. So I'm glad the technical committee cleared that up for us. That was excellent. Here also, we can see in 110.7 that this is really talking about when outside contractors come onto your facility, or there's multiple contractors there. This is a brand new informational note that's telling us that more than one employer can be responsible for identifying those hazardous conditions and creating the safe work practices that we need. Okay, so this applies to all of 110.7, not just 110.7C. So basically, if an outside contractor does come on your property, there does have to be a documented meeting before the work starts. The host employer would have to identify all those hazards. But if the contractor sees something out of the ordinary that the host employer didn't know about, well, he still or she still has to take steps to make sure everybody is safe. And so can be more than one employer accomplishing that. This also in 110.8 is a change for us. This used to say that when we were using some type of test equipment, that it was above 50 volts. Now it says at the end of this sentence, where an electrical hazard exists. So to begin with, we have to be qualified to be able to use a piece of test instrument, and wherever there's an electrical hazard, okay? So that would mean that not just a shock hazard, because above 50 volts would indicate we're only talking about shock, but not necessarily. If we are 1.2 calories per centimeter squared or above, there's an arc flash hazard there too. So they wanted to make sure that any electrical hazard, not just shock. This is a great change. I can tell you it does align up very well with the National Electrical Code, which is 110.3b, but here it's 110.12 and 70E. Equipment shall be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And so basically speaking, we have to follow those instructions, and not just with this document. I mean, the National Electrical Code is involved with this. NFPA 70B, our maintenance standard, is also involved with this. And we have to make sure that we have a copy of those, either electronic or hard copy. We have to make sure we understand what those instructions are. And if it comes with no instructions, then the authority having jurisdiction can go ahead and make a determination there on what we should do. But realistically, almost all equipment that we are purchasing does come with manufacturer's instructions. And one of the big ones that comes through my mind is torque settings. I mean, I can get a molded case circuit breaker, 3-pole, 30 amp breaker, and it comes with a torque setting on it. And so long throughout the industry did we just ignore that. And so now all the instructions we have to follow. Finally got up to Article 120, so that's good. And here we can see the lockout tagout procedure. What they actually did here for us in that last sentence, our lockout tagout procedure does have to meet the requirements of applicable codes, standards, and regulations. So I know we can be overwhelmed with standards. I mean, the NFPA by themselves have over 300 codes and standards. But here they are referring us to an OSHA standard, which 1910.147, which is how we control hazardous energy, also an ANSI standard they are referring us to. And so we've got to make sure our lockout tagout program does comply with all those standards. This is talking about if I only want to use a lock and no tag, if I don't want to put a tag on it, which, of course, is our choice. But if I do want to use only a lock, I do have to satisfy 3 conditions now. And it has to be just one piece of equipment that I'm locking and tagging out. It has to be within the shift that I'm working in. And any employee exposed to those hazards associated with re-energizing it are familiar with our lockout tagout procedure. So they're just re-emphasizing the fact that I can use just a lock if I can satisfy 3 conditions. New informational note here in Article 120.4 about capacitors. And so what I want to mention to you about this is that this is very new in 70E because we have a new article on capacitors. So in Chapter 3, there's Article 360. We never had it before. So now there's 6 articles in Chapter 3, which is our special equipment, and a new annex, NXR. So here they are talking about lockout tagout, but they want us to understand now the proper method on how to discharge a capacitor, which they would talk about up in Article 360 and the new annex. The shock risk assessment and the estimate of severity that it might be. They gave us a couple things that we have to look at now in a little bit more detail. The design of the equipment and the condition of maintenance. And condition of maintenance is extremely important. So if we're doing a risk assessment and we're going to try to estimate the likelihood that I might get injured, and I see equipment like this, my estimate's going to go quite a bit higher because condition of maintenance, it looks like that equipment was never maintained. But we do have to take into consideration of maintenance for not just shock risk risk assessments, but also arc flash. We have to look at the condition of maintenance of that equipment. This is brand new. This is table 130.5C, which gives us an idea if we are going to face the hazard of arc flash. And so they added a new task in this table, operation of a circuit breaker or a switch for the first time after it was installed, or after we did some maintenance on it, or maybe did a modification to it. And so that is a hazard. When we go from a de-energized state to an energized state, we're always going to have a higher incident of maybe having something occur that is outside of our boundaries. So they put this new one in to get a heightened awareness of that. So we should make sure we understand that there's a lot of tasks here that might come into play there, but one of them is after a circuit breaker or switch was first installed. If we are using the incident energy analysis method to choose our personal protective equipment, and of course, there's 2 methods we can use. We can use the number 1 preferred method, which is the incident energy analysis method, or we could use the PPE category method. Then if we're using the first method, which is the preferred method, they've given us a couple new notes to this table. So this is just telling us if the incident energy is 1.2 all the way up to 12, some of the PPE that we do have to wear. But then they gave us this little new note D on footwear that throughout the whole standard, it's going to tell us leather footwear, dielectric footwear. But now they're telling us this, that other than leather or dielectric shall be permitted as long as it has been tested to demonstrate that it is not going to ignite, it's not going to melt, there'll be no dripping at whatever incident energy it's going to be exposed to. So clarified that a little bit about footwear. I can wear something else besides just leather. Also, note E is telling us that maybe for some reason I have to wear a reflective vest. Maybe that's part of the requirements of the company I'm working for. And the reflective vest would have to have an arc rating on it, but it's just telling us that that reflective vest or that rain jacket or whatever other piece of apparel I'm going to put on does not have to be equal to or greater than the estimated incident energy, as long as it's worn over my arc rated clothing that is equal to or greater than the calories per centimeter squared. So a couple new notes there for the incident energy analysis method. Also in 130.7C1, here we are going to try to establish an electrically safe work condition, but the estimated incident energy is greater than what the clothing is that I can go purchase. But the clothing you can go purchase now, I can tell you, is getting quite high. I have seen arc flash suits up to 175 calories, so they're getting up there. But let's say you don't have that at your facility, and you have incident energy of 54 calories, and you don't have any clothing that could meet that requirement. They're telling us now that we could reduce the likelihood of something occurring, let's say an arc flash, by using first some type of non-contact tester. All right, that would be no problem. We could go ahead and do that before we use the contact tester. So we would only use the non-contact tester to give us a little bit of indication that there might not be any voltage present there. But then we would have to put our contact tester on it. And sometimes we could, if the equipment does allow it, we could observe the gaps inside, so that if there were infrared windows there that we could look through, that would also be another method we could use to help us that the contacts did open up. Increase the work distance is always something that we should look at to try to keep workers safe. And then the design of the equipment, somehow to maybe put in something that could reduce that incident energy, either zone selective interlocking, class L fuses, maintenance mode button on circuit breakers, something that could help us with getting that down a little bit. They did revise our table on rubber gloves. They gave us, depending on the class of glove, whether it's a 00 or a 1 or a 2, when you get up into medium voltage, that the distance between the gauntlet and the cuff. So there does have to, the rubber glove does have to extend a little bit beyond the leather protector. And you can see a 1/2 inch for the lower classifications and a little bit higher when we get up into those higher voltage levels. Here, they have decided in 130.7C14, the standards for personal protective equipment, they have now included the international standards. So the International Electrotechnical Commission has some standards on these, and let's face it, that just means that NFPA 70E is becoming adopted worldwide. So the international standards are also coming into play. Here's our brand new article, Article 360. And probably when I looked through this article, I said a couple of the things that really stuck out to me was what size is the capacitor? So 360.3 talks about the stored energy that capacitor can actually hold. And it gives us 3 different thresholds up there. And then 360.4, some specific measures, which are different than Article 130. And so remember, this is a supplemental or modification chapter. And every article in Chapter 3 can change what we learned in Article 130. And there's a different way to establish an electrically safe work condition for capacitors. And then it talks about how we can ground those out, either a hard grounding or a soft grounding. And so brand new article. And I think the technical committee did a great job on that. They did play with some of the annexes also. So Annex D, and the reason they changed Annex D is a little bit is because the IEEE 1584 software changed and has some great new formulas in there. And so they wanted to just reflect that a little bit. Now, they're not going to actually show us those formulas because they're pretty complicated, but they do address that change from IEEE. And risk assessment and risk control was expanded extensively in Annex F. And then, of course, we have a new Annex, Annex R, working with capacitors. So we are going to open this up to questions now, and Ryan is going to help us with that. He's going to go ahead and organize those questions for us, and either Ryan or myself will answer those questions. But I do want to show you our last slide, and I will put it up there. We perform seminars, of course, every week. I personally teach these virtual seminars myself. And so I put the presentation together that all the instructors use, and I made that as interactive as possible. So even though it's a virtual seminar, or we can still be face-to-face, that's also can occur, but we actually try to make it so that the students are going to be involved, because we believe that they'll get a better experience out of that. So knowing all that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you so much, Bob, for your expertise on this topic. And you have piqued the interest and curiosity of many, many people on this call. We're getting lots and lots of questions, and keep them coming, y'all. If you have a specific curiosity, we are going to do our best to answer as many as possible by the top of the hour. And we got some really great ones. We're going to start here, Bob, with we got a few curiosities about the concept of a barrier. As it's pertained to NFPA 70E. And I'll kind of wrap in a couple of the questions we got on a barrier. Two examples and questions. Is this a barrier or not? The first one is a person. Can a person be considered a barrier, kind of standing there, standing guard from the area? And the second question is, can a piece of cardboard be used, in the context being that this individual has observed a few occasions where contractors use cardboard to cover open panels? Is that considered an acceptable barrier?
Those are excellent questions. You're 100% right, Ryan. So first, I'm going to address if a person can be that barrier, and that is 100% true. I can have a standby person, and I think that's one of the best barriers, because that standby person could also maybe give a little bit of an explanation to who's trying to enter that space and say, you have to be qualified. You have to have all the personal protective equipment on that worker has over there. Please don't interfere with what he's trying to do. So I love having a person as being a standby person. Cardboard, I'm going to say no to the cardboard, because one, the first thing that went through my mind is that the contractor is putting the cardboard up because the panel is energized, and we cannot, we have to follow all the manufacturer's instructions, right? We cannot leave an energized panel just with a cardboard protector there. We have to guarantee that there's going to be no exposure to any electrical hazards. So on a person, yes. Cardboard, no.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. And we definitely have some a variety of different curiosities about what about this case? Would I need to wear PPE? Or how about in this situation? Would I need to wear PPE? Let me see if I can run through the first one here, and that is, if the equipment is what we call installed correctly, maintained correctly, the covers are in place, can you operate, quote unquote, that equipment without full PPE in addition to walking by it?
That is an excellent question. And so that's also a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. And so there are 6 conditions we have to meet to be able to operate that equipment with no personal protective equipment on. And it does have to be installed correctly. It has to be maintained properly. We got to have all the covers in place. We've got to make sure there's no openings, no evidence of impending failure. And so if we meet those 6 conditions, we can certainly operate that equipment in a normal condition, which would be dressed just the way we are today. The biggest throwback to that one is maintained properly, because that maintained properly statement means this: maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and applicable industry codes and standards, which is NFPA 70B. And so you would have to have a copy of 70B. You would have to reference that in your electrical safety program. And then you could definitely, if you could document that that equipment was maintained properly, you could definitely operate it with no personal protective equipment.
Excellent. And just to piggyback on what Bob's saying here before we get to our next question, there's been some curiosities that I was able to answer while Bob was presenting today about the documentation of your proof of attending this session. And because this is a free public educational session, there will be no official certificate of attending this session. However, we do highly recommend that basically you use this session as the launch point of learning about the latest changes and to get your official training, your skills, your knowledge, your safety training for a qualified person to really take that official course, that 2-day training course. And what you're seeing here is we can offer the people who are here right now a discount on that training course. So just keep that in mind in terms of certificate. If you want to document a certificate of attending a training, go to that official training as a follow-up to this educational session here. Here's another scenario, Bob. How about flipping a breaker? Does that count as interacting with the equipment?
Yes.
Excellent. And does it matter if
I,
it's, go ahead.
I want to, yeah, let me, I'll expand on that. I like one word answers though. I like when I ask somebody a question, I expect a yes or no. So that's why I said yes immediately. But remember that circuit breaker has to be maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So here's some of the things that the manufacturer says. The manufacturer will say, okay, you've got to exercise that breaker once a year. You've got to verify the proper torque setting on that breaker. So when we're terminating our conductors under the lugs or the screws, there is a torque setting we have to follow there. Most manufacturers are saying that the molded case circuit breakers are plastic, so that's insulation. They want that megged out once a year. And a lot of manufacturers now are telling us, and 70B tells us, that we should have some thermal imaging there. So an infrared scan at least once a year. And so if we can document that those things have occurred, we can operate that breaker in a normal condition, which is dressed just the way we are today.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I think I can answer or help answer this next question with your feedback here, Bob. And someone's indicating, how often do arc flash surveys need to be conducted, or arc flash analysis need to be conducted, and I'll add to that, to be kind of updated and looked at? That's every 5 years. Is that still right?
That is still correct. And now I want to expand on that one just a little bit too. What it tells us in the document is this, that every 5 years, we have to review the data of the arc flash analysis. So we have to go in and make sure the fault current is still correct, the clearing times are still correct. Now, if there's been no major changes, in other words, we didn't upgrade our transformers, we didn't change out the switch gear, or we didn't change out a main distribution panel, then basically our arc flash analysis should still be valid. So it can last a long time. There's no doubt about it. There has been some requirements when labels have changed. And so, but if the information behind that label has not changed, we're still in good shape. And a lot of times what I'll tell people is that, you can't have incident energy and the PPE category on the same label. And if you do, they used the incident energy analysis method to generate that label. So let's just cross out the PPE category. You don't need it there. Your information that you have is good. You just got a little too much on that label. But it's true, though. We just have to review the data and make sure there's been no major changes.
Excellent. And kind of to follow up on that in terms of training frequency, to get electrical and arc flash electrical safety training, that is every 3 years still. Is that correct? One of our attendees was wondering.
Yes, that is correct. And so that requirement was put in 2015 NFPA 70E. And so we have to have documented electrical safety training occurring every time the standard changes. So once every 3 years, they want you to be trained on the new standard that comes out. That's a great question also.
Excellent. Let's see here. There's some really good applied stuff going on here. Uh, Kind of in the situation of looking at the different equipment, like we were just talking about, whether you wear or don't wear PPE. There's some other curiosities about how about this type of PPE, or how about this calorie rating versus the other. So I will bounce one off you right now for the sake of discussion on our call, and that is, how about a 12 cal rated 50-inch long lab coat with 8 calorie pants? So we got 12 calorie lab coat, 8 calorie pants. Does that meet the requirement for up to 8 calories of protection? And uh, it looks like that their organization has had discussions about whether a lab coat style arc flash clothing with pants would still be acceptable. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. That is 100% acceptable. I mean, you've got 8 calorie pants on, you've got a 12 cal lab coat. The highest incident energy you would be able to work at would be 8 calories because your pants are going to be exposed. And depending on the equipment that you're working on, sometimes we have vents in the bottom of this equipment where energy could come out. So we don't want people to be under the impression that you're good for 12 cal because you have the lab coat on, because you have an exposure there near the bottom of only 8 cal. This goes hand in hand a little bit with layering. Let's say that, for instance, instead of the lab coat, that they had coveralls on that covered their whole body, and those coveralls were 12 cal. And then underneath it, they had an 8 cal shirt and 8 cal pants. In 2012, we could have just added those up and that would have been 20 calorie of protection. But in 2015, that changed. And now you can't just add those up. That actually has to be tested. And so you have to go back to the manufacturer of the arc rated clothing and you have to ask them, what would the new calorie rating be if I was going to layer this clothing? But the first part of that would be only 8 cal because you do have an exposure close to the floor of 8 cal.
For sure. And kind of in a related question, and I think I'll ask this one to you because I know you are the guy to ask at our organization, and that is, does TPC training offer quick reference charts for selecting the correct calorie rating for arc flash gear related to the voltage or type of work they might be doing?
Oh, that's a great question. So in the regular presentation that Ryan was talking about, which has probably 300 slides in it, we actually will bring up different scenarios with different types of equipment, and we will introduce the student to the fact that he walked up to or she walked up to this piece of equipment and there's no arc flash warning label at all. And we show them how to use table 130.7C15 and determine what personal protective equipment they might need. Now, if there's already an arc flash warning label there and it's, let's say, derived from method number one, the incident energy analysis method, then we go straight through and we tell them that here's the amount of incident energy. Here's how you would select the proper personal protective equipment. And my friend Ryan, who's on this call, has built us a simulation that I use every time I teach, where we will show you or the student a label, and then they will have choices to make of what shirt to pick or what set of gloves to put on. And then the software gives them an idea if they're right or wrong. And so it really allows them to become real familiar with how the arc flash warning label is going to reflect their choice of personal protective equipment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And some of these higher calorie ratings are coming up in terms of, we'd love to get your thoughts, I think, to help answer a few of these folks' curiosities about clothing that starts getting over 40 calories in rating. If a piece of clothing, let's say, is rated more than 40, 50, 60, let's say, calories, is that still recognized by NFPA and OSHA as providing proper protection for that incident energy? And how would you comment on clothing items that are rated higher than 40 calories?
That's excellent. I love that question. So a couple times already today, I have mentioned there's two methods of choosing your personal protective equipment method, personal protective equipment. The first method is the incident energy analysis method. That has no parameters. I do not care if the incident energy is 5,000 calories per centimeter squared. Here's what that method says. If you can go out and purchase the clothing that matches that incident energy, 100% legal. Now, so long in the history of NFPA 70E did we get tied up with the PPE category method, which does have upper parameters. The upper parameter there is 40 cal. So that's it. If you're using method number 2 to choose your personal protective equipment, you are done at 40 calories. And the standard says this: you would now have to switch over to the incident energy analysis method. And of course, the incident energy analysis method is where we're going to be using some software, come into your facility, model your electrical distribution system, and come up with the fault current and clearing time throughout the whole plant, and put a label on that says what the incident energy is at a particular piece of equipment. And that, the technical committee believes, is the best method. And there is no upper parameter for that. It's legal to work on that. I will see labels all the time that say this: no energized work permitted, because the incident energy is over 40 calories. That should never be put on a label, because the clothing manufacturers and the people that are supplying the personal protective equipment to us, that clothing is going higher and higher and higher every day. And so as long as we're using method number 1, we can, and if we can purchase the clothing that is at least equal to or above that incident energy, 100% legal to work on that equipment.
Excellent, Bob. And oh my goodness, we have a wealth of questions that have come in that I really wish we had 2 more hours on this webinar to spend with you all here in public. Unfortunately, we want to honor everyone's time and get us all released by the top of the hour. However, for the Bob, just to let you know, and for everyone here, we have all sorts of curiosities about layering PPE, and about, in this situation, should I wear this type of PPE versus this other one? Frequency of training, types of training that are appropriate, how to set up electrical safety training, how to understand the calorie ratings, how to understand equipment manufacturers' ratings. There's all sorts of curiosities here, and this is fantastic. And this is exactly what you should bring to the classroom after this, and really spend that dedicated 2 days of time over the internet on a high fidelity video chat with the instructor, or in the classroom with that instructor coming to your facility and observing all safety rules there at your facility. So there's really some options you have to continue to learn about this. And this is kind of perfectly emblematic to why we can't really cover everything about electrical safety in just 1 hour. This kind of gets you started. This is your starter informational session. You really want to go from here. However, let's answer one more question, and this one comes up almost all the time, so I will select this one from the collection. And for those of you who unfortunately didn't get their question answered today, call us back at this number you see here, 877-978-7246. In this case, that is our instructor-led training business, and we can get you connected to an expert, maybe Bob himself, and we can get some of your questions answered as you get prepared to take your next training class. However, here's one that I know Bob and I always see when we teach class, and that is racking in or out a switch gear considered live electrical work, even if the covers are on, secure, and in place, Bob?
Okay, so it's work. I am doing work, and it is energized behind those doors. The bus bars are energized. And so I am going to tell you it's also in our table as being one of the um, higher end tasks that an arc flash is likely to occur. And so here would be my practical common sense answer to that, is that we always put personal protective equipment on if those buses are energized behind that switchgear. Every single time. That would be considered energized work. I would much rather see, if possible, that we could establish an electrically safe work condition to do that work. I understand we always can't. And so if we cannot, there's other methods we can use, which is remote racking. And so I can get a remote racker, and the worker would not even have to be in the same room to rack that in and out. But we definitely should understand that racking in and out is considered live energized work. And I can show you flash suit after flash suit that was destroyed because somebody did not believe that that was energized work. But those buses behind that switchgear is energized, and we have to be at our utmost diligence when we're doing that task.
Thank you so much, Bob, for your expertise today. And thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful having your questions at the table and for your involvement in this session. Again, reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions about electrical training, how you can gain some more of these skills and knowledge for your qualified electrical workers. Thank you so much and have a great day.